Story 1. It was the first time I was genuinely afraid in a movie theater. Jump scares and extreme gore never make me feel fear, but the wailing of their missing friend in the dark of night was terrifying. I was left with a satisfying case of the heebie-jeebies. Edit. Also, keep in mind that no one had ever used the word selfie. We did not have a culture of people recording themselves in this way. New camcorders started to come with flip-around screens, but people used them to film the whole family opening gifts at Christmas, not for talking head influencer content. The snotty-nosed, crying into the camera footage felt like the instinct of a terrified person trying to make sure their story was told. There were no YouTube pranksters desensitizing us or making us suspicious of someone holding or interacting with a camera. Story 2. I was 19. I thought it was a decent movie, but not life-changing. The next morning, when I had to walk through a dark trail on my way to work, I won't say I ran, but a light shuffle and slow jog felt appropriate at the time. Story 3. I saw it at an advanced screening in Philadelphia on a summer day. My roommate and I watched the movie and then left the theater. I remember walking out of the dark theater into the hot sun. The hairs on our arms were still standing on end. The next day, while he was at work, I took a coat rack, stuck it in the corner of his bedroom, and put a coat and hat on it. When he came home, he was scared to death. Story 4. The film was okay but not exceptional. However, the online promotional material sold it. It was the first film to really use the internet to create a backstory. For most people, it was unclear where the line between fiction and nonfiction lay. Story 5. That movie was a unique experience for me. Until the final 60 seconds, I thought it was pretty mediocre. There were some scary moments, but otherwise it was a slow burn with little payoff. The final minute, culminating in the last shot, was like placing a capstone atop an archway, completing its construction. It really tied the entire film together. Story 6. A unique, innovative film for its time, but only the ending was truly scary. It also made me a bit nauseous. It still does. There was too much shaky camera work. Story 7. The night before we went camping, my dad took my little brother and me. I was 17 and he was 13. Terrified us, especially my little brother. Camping was disorienting. Story 8. I thought I had watched the scariest documentary ever made. Story 9. Seeing the Blair Witch Project in theaters was a unique experience, with an unsettling atmosphere that lingered long after. Story 10. It was very scary because everybody thought it was real back then. Story 11. I saw a leaked copy on a newsgroup server around 1998 or 1999. My college roommates and I knew only that the footage had been found and someone had edited it into a documentary. This leaked copy may have been an example of early viral marketing. We watched it on a computer, probably using QuickTime. At the time, the internet was nothing like it is today, and we genuinely believed it was real. It was not until we started hearing about the upcoming release and saw the online backstory that we realized it was probably fiction. Up until that point, we were terrified. We downloaded it in 15 megabyte parts and used Stuffit Expander to reassemble the audio-video interleave, AVI, or QuickTime Movie MOV file. I feel old now. Story 12. I was 29. It was scary, but not as scary as Salem's Lot when I was 9 in 1979, when it was on television. If that makes sense. Story 13. It scared the piss out of me. I was also someone who thought it was real. My sister was in college at the time, and she brought home one of the missing person flyers from her campus before we saw it. Story 14. It was in theaters at the same time as The Haunting, the 1999 version with Liam Neeson and a lot of computer-generated ghost effects. Blair, which was genuinely scary. I remember talking with someone outside the theater who thought it was dumb compared to The Haunting. They said The Haunting was cool, with cool ghosts and effects, and that this one was just a bunch of idiots running around in a damn forest. Screw that noise. Nobody remembers the 1999 Haunting. Blair, which was a monument to creeping dread, not a series of ritualized, predictable jump scares cranked out of a studio factory. Now I'm mad. Story 15. I actually saw it on a bootleg video home system almost a year before it was in theaters. My roommate's boyfriend brought it over and told us it was found footage from a real missing persons case and that it had been edited together sequentially by the Maine State Police at the request of the parents of the missing teens. There was no title or credits. It just went to static after the jump scare at the end. It scared the ever-loving shit out of us until we found out it was a regular movie, which I think was the following day. Story 16. The viral marketing was groundbreaking at the time, but ultimately I found the movie underwhelming. Story 17. The only seats available when we entered the theater were in the front row. I ended up with motion sickness from watching the shaky cam so close and had to stare at my lap for most of the movie. Story 18. It was a genuinely unique movie experience. No one had made anything like it before. Story 19. I was unimpressed, to be honest. Compared to, say, The Matrix or Fight Club, that little bit of zeitgeist just felt like a badly made film. The plot was hard to follow, the action even harder, and rather than frightening, it mostly felt like a mess punctuated by a few admittedly effective jump scares. My opinion couldn't have contrasted more sharply with those of people I knew, and I never quite understood what they saw in it. The only thing that stood out was that nearly everyone I knew was certain the problems I found so disagreeable were to be expected, since the footage was supposed to have been recovered after a mysterious disappearance. They said it was badly structured because people were just filming normal life that happened to go terribly wrong. In other words, they thought it was real. Of all the things I didn't understand, that was the part that confused me most. Even as a child, the idea that it was an actual paranormal snuff film didn't make sense. Mostly because the kinds of theaters showing it were not places you would expect to screen something genuinely horrible. The powers that be were squeamish about pretend violence, so the fact that it was rated, approved, and widely distributed seemed, I thought, to indicate that it must be made up. If it was fake, it was rather tame in terms of violence. Story 20. Summary. I downloaded a poor copy of the Blair Witch Project before it was released, found marketing pages that were not public, and convinced myself and 5 friends it was real. I have a story about this. I think it was December 1998. The movie premiered in January 1999. I worked for an internet service provider in Akron, Ohio. At the time, the only way to download a movie was through newsgroups. A movie might be split into more than 200 parts, and each part could be further split into more than 50 subparts, so file names looked like Blair Witch Project 175 of 235 _ part 08 of 50. We had a feed that showed only titles, and you had to request the files in batches. Long story short, it took hours to download the lowest quality copies. One day, I noticed a movie on a server on an island somewhere labeled Blair Witch Project Test Screening. I looked it up and found what appeared to be a documentary about the Blair Witch and the found footage. That page turned out to be marketing material that was not yet public. The studio did not expect anyone to search for it and had not added disclaimers. It looked to me like a real documentary, and I felt like I had inside knowledge. I requested all the files. They assembled into a Windows Media video file of camcorder footage of an audience watching the Blair Witch Project. The copy was so poor I could barely see the movie, but bolstered by the apparent documentary and being younger and more inclined to believe in the paranormal, I had "I want to believe" posters. I invited 5 friends over to see what I thought was proof that would soon be revealed to the public. We were all convinced it was real. We talked ourselves into it. A month later, the actual movie was released. I was embarrassed when I saw a full-resolution copy and it was obvious it was a film. My friends and I laughed at our ignorance, but we learned a lot from the experience. Story 21. It was exciting and a big deal. People were very into it. I knew employees at one theater. When you walk through a curtain to exit out the back, an employee stood in the corner facing away, wearing a flannel shirt. People were freaking out. Story 22. I went with my new girlfriend at the time. I knew it was fictional. She did not, although I assumed she did. I thought it was a clever idea, but the performative style of talking into the camera the whole time pulled me out of the story and became tedious. I do not know how else you do it. Perhaps it should not have been feature length. The gimmick then would not have had time to become tiresome. The ending was inspired and it ended on a high note. My girlfriend had nearly climbed under her seat by the end, and I had to keep reassuring her afterward that it was not real. My assessment was that it was too scary to be watched as nonfiction and not quite scary enough to work as fiction. I have only seen it once, and I do not rewatch movies much, even ones I like. Story 23. The movie was a bit of a letdown. The online hype was notable because it was one of the first films to use that kind of marketing. The promotion emphasized that it was a true story, even though it was completely fictional. Story 24. It was a good, interesting concept that felt different and fresh for its time. There was a lot of hype around it. Story 25. I watched it at a drive-in theater with my sister. We were afraid to walk to the bathroom. I am 23 years old and female, and my sister is 19 years old and female. Story 26. It was nauseating. I experienced severe motion sickness, and as an added bonus, I was scared in the woods during the daytime. Story 27. I wasn't old enough to see it. One of our older sisters bought tickets for us in advance. But when we got there, they were checking IDs at the entrance. A now retired National Basketball Association player who was in college at the time pretended to be my older brother, and they let me in. Story 28. I was 13, and there were only 2 other people in the cinema. I sat at the back and they sat at the front. It was honestly one of the best viewing experiences I have ever had. I felt completely immersed. I also got an extra scare when an usher walked behind me. Story 29. It was so much fun. I was one of the lucky people who had access to a video home system tape of it before the theatrical release. A friend had the tape and invited us to his house to watch it. We all thought it was real. When it opened in theaters, I went to see it again. It was an independent theater that had been decorated with little stick figures, handprints, and other creepy items. Imagine watching it and truly believing it was real. There were no credits. Good times. Story 30. I saw it at an art house with my wife. I had no idea what I was getting into. At the end, the theater was completely silent. Then someone was poked, and with so much tension, a woman began shrieking and crying. It was a truly unique experience. Story 31. I bought tickets to the Ring and snuck into Blair Witch because my high school friends and I were underage. It was terrifying and felt very real at the time. Story 32. It was super fun because it felt artsy. I had seen Man Bites Dog a couple of years earlier and was excited for another mockumentary. But the hype machine was in overdrive and everyone I knew was buying tickets. I remember my local nightly news ran a segment calling it the scariest movie ever made, and the fact that the actors were unknown made it even better. Story 33. I was 17 and went in not entirely sure it was fictional because of the superb viral marketing for the movie. Creeped me out. Afterwards, I drove out to the woods with friends and got very drunk. I promised my ride home that I would not puke in her car. I managed to avoid vomiting until I got home. My mother heard me throwing up and asked if I was okay. I sobbed, "Mom, I'm so drunk. I'm sorry." She laughed, said, "Let that be a lesson for you," and slammed my bedroom door as loudly as she could. That was my experience with the Blair Witch Project. Story 34. It was overhyped beyond words. When the film ended, most people looked at one another and said, "Huh." Story 35. My family and I laughed all the way through it. We lived only a half hour from the area where it was filmed, and it was a favorite hiking spot. We often yelled at the screen when they were near the big rock, telling them to turn around because the road was right there and they could flag someone down. Story 36. It was disappointing and not scary. People were leaving because they were experiencing motion sickness. It was 90% waiting for something to happen and 10% trying not to vomit. What it did extremely well was guerrilla marketing to convince children it was real. Story 37. It was insane. We walked out of the theater thinking we had paid to see someone get murdered on the big screen. A buddy of ours was home alone that week with his parents out of state on their annual road trip. We could not let the opportunity pass, so the rest of us planned to swing by after dark and decorate his house. We made stick figures and leaned them against the windows from the outside. Old twine of different lengths was wrapped and hung from the porch. About 3 a.m., we began raking sticks and branches against the siding and mumbling, One of my buddy's girlfriends stood motionless on the corner of the porch, staring into the dark. We started hearing screams and pure panic from inside. This was the pre-cell phone era unless you were Zach Morris, so the only communication he had was the house phone. Fortunately, we had snuck in earlier and disconnected the line from the wall. He was yelling at the phone because it did not even have a dial tone. I am pretty sure he started crying, and that is when we all realized we might have taken it a bit far. He was furious, but it is a story we still talk about. Story 38. I went to a large theater in West Des Moines, Iowa, with a friend who was visiting from out of town. We were both somewhat hungover, and the fast, jerky motion on the screen only worsened our headaches and nausea. The film was unnerving, and when we stepped outside, a car was on fire in the parking lot near where we had parked. The acrid smell of burning oil and rubber made him vomit, and I developed a migraine that lasted until the next day. Story 39. I was in middle school, and although I wanted to see it, I had to wait until it came out on video, so by then the allure had fizzled. Looking back now as an adult with a background in marketing, I believe their marketing strategy was brilliant and is nearly impossible to recreate. Story 40. I was entirely underwhelmed, but I grew up hunting and camping, so the idea of the woods being scary did not bother me. It was 90 minutes of mediocrity with one good jump scare at the end. Story 41. There was nothing like it. It was very immersive. I saw it at my mate's local cinema. He lived near a farm, and I had to walk along wooded country roads at night to return to his house. That was fun. Story 42. The small-town theater was packed, even though the film was playing on both screens. People screamed at the end, and I think one older woman vomited. Several people left before the movie was half over. I think much of that was due to the marketing campaign, which made it seem real. Many in the audience were convinced it was real. Story 43. I was 50, so I was probably not the target demographic. The camera work was awful, and I never wanted to hear the lead actress's voice again. It was not believable, interesting, or even thought-provoking. Just a mess. Story 44. I experienced severe motion sickness and had to ask my then-boyfriend to pull the car over on the way home so I could vomit into a drain. Story 45. Better than that, I saw it on a bootleg video home system tape before it was in theaters. I almost had a heart attack when a possum ran across my path as I left my friend's house in the dark. Story 46. Amazing. It was unlike any movie experience I've ever had. You had to be in a group. It was a terrifying shared experience. It wasn't about whether it was real. Only someone naive would have thought so. Story 47. I went to Bachelor's Grove Cemetery in Midlothian, Illinois when I was 15. It is said that Al Capone dumped bodies there, and there are other haunting stories. That added to the fear factor. Then a trooper saw us leaving, and we received trespassing tickets, so it was quite a day. Story 48. I saw it at the drive-in. It was a good movie. The audience was engaged and everyone had fun. Afterwards, the movie sank in because we kept seeing things in our lives that related to it. We used it as the theme for every group camp that summer and had a ball. It was a fun summer because of that movie. Story 49. The movie itself was fine, but it was the build-up that got you. They really made you believe this could be real. They masterfully used the early internet to spread myths and rumors about what happened. If you were willing to believe, it was pretty cool. Story 50. I walked out, scared out of my mind, in a small wooded community and never went camping again. It was like Jaws for camping. Story 51. I was 14. It was my first R-rated movie, and my dad took me to see it in a theater. I thought it was awesome, but he looked terribly unimpressed. The good news was that he liked it better than my choice during the previous outing, Mars Attacks. Story 52. Absolutely terrifying. I was 16 and forbidden to see it by my parents, so I snuck to watch it with a friend. I remember being so petrified that I did not move a muscle until the lights came on and the credits ended. I just sat there white-knuckling it. Obviously, years later it was revealed to be a hoax, but the damage was done. I have only rewatched it a handful of times since because, at 42, it still scares the absolute shit out of me. Story 53. It was dumb. I wanted my money back. I left feeling physically ill from the camera shaking, unimpressed and ripped off. Did I just sit through this? The ending was the best part, but it wasn't worth the wait and, in my humble opinion, not that great. Story 54. It was a lot, but I think the part one remember most was feeling sick from the motion of the camera. Story 55. I went with two coworkers to see it after work. Both vomited, one did so multiple times. Story 56. It was fairly scary. The cinema was unusually quiet. My hands were sweaty when I left. Story 57. I saw it and was extremely scared, especially when it cut to the person standing in the corner at the end. I immediately went home and searched what little there was on the internet for any idea whether it was actually real. The marketing presented it as a found footage release, and there had been nothing like it before. Story 58. I thought it was a novel concept for a horror movie, but I also thought anyone who believed it was real was an idiot. Story 59. It was a unique format for the time, but only the really gullible thought it was real. Story 60. Oh man, I was 18 and about 50% convinced from the ads that it was real. I remember being freaked out leaving the movie. That ending, where Mike is standing in the corner, stayed with me. I couldn't sleep after that. Story 61. We walked out and said, huh. It was not anything to write home about. Story 62. I was working at a movie theater at the time. Many people walked out with motion sickness. Story 63. I helped spread the hype about it being real and went with a group of friends who may have believed it. They were horrified, and I was very entertained. The shaky camera work gave me a headache, but that was the only real negative. 10 out of 10. I would love to experience that year-long hype again. Story 64. I felt like I had been robbed because the movie was terrible. Story 65. Horrible. I wanted my money back. It ruined the found footage genre for me. It was not scary, only mildly mysterious and occasionally thrilling at best. Story 66. Probably not as bad as watching it at night, then riding the scariest bike ride home through the forest. Story 67. The movie was great, but 3 people in our theater vomited. Story 68. I saw it on opening weekend after all the hype. I thought the whole time this can't be real, but I couldn't help a small doubt that maybe it was. It is not a great movie in a classical sense, but because of the hype and the idea that it might be real, it worked. Story 69. The constantly building anxiety culminated in a final scene that was utterly terrifying and breathtaking. I loved it. Story 70. We were underage and snuck beers in. One of the cans rolled all the way up front. That is all I remember. Story 71. I live in Tennessee. While I was in the theater, a nice gentleman sat behind me. He was probably about 300 pounds, wearing a trucker hat, with a full beard and a big belt buckle. After the last scene played, there was silence, and the man said in a strong East Tennessee accent, I think I done shit my pants. I'm so glad I finally got the chance to tell someone this story. Story 72. It was so terrifying that I didn't know how I would make it to the end. After that, I had to sleep with the light on. I was in college. Story 73. It was the first time a movie made me feel as if I were carsick. Story 74. Weird as hell. A jittery camera follows the action throughout the entire movie. Story 75. By the time the film reached New Zealand, we knew it wasn't real. In the theater I attended, people were very scared despite later claims that it's not very scary. Story 76. I ruined it for everyone in the theater. There were many close-up scenes of a character being scared and sobbing. For whatever reason, my eye was drawn to a booger in the middle of her oversized face on the screen. It popped in and out of her nose as she sobbed and hyperventilated, like a slimy, indecisive whack-a-mole. We cackled like drunk toddlers for the entire movie and probably made it hard for others to take it seriously. Story 77. For me, it was a perfect storm. I had seen just a glimpse of a documentary on television about how the movie was made with real found footage. I did not think much about it. I went to see it in theaters a few days later. The whole time I kept thinking this is real and this cannot be real. Took me about an hour after watching it to realize it was not real. Story 78. I got drawn right into it. I probably looked like a terrified cartoon character with my hair sticking straight up. My buddy and I walked to the nearest bar afterward. It was the first time I had a martini. I had three. Story 79. When it was over, the film stopped and the lights came up. Two girls in the front row screamed and ran out. There was no credit roll during this screening. I am not sure why or if that was the case for everyone. Home video releases included credits. Story 80. I think I walked out. I felt nauseous because the filming was chaotic. Story 81. I saw it in the cinema 3 times. That last scene gave me a chill each time. Story 82. It was not that great. Mostly because I went with 2 friends and one spent the entire movie saying ugh, oh please, and stupid to the point that other people moved away from us. We told him to shut the F up and we moved. When the final jump scare happened, he laughed and walked out before the credits saying what a shit movie. He ruined any possible tension the rest of us felt. Personally, I was enjoying it once we moved away from him and could not hear his complaints. The ending was ruined because I was too busy trying to hit him with my popcorn bucket. Story 83. I laughed a lot. It did not scare me, but it was edited so brilliantly that it felt like something frightening was happening. Story 84. I was less than a year old, but my mother saw it and said it was very nice and pretty spooky. Back then, people thought it was real, so it was 100 times scarier. She said the experience was similar to when the first Paranormal Activity came out. Because people were not sure whether it was real, the found footage quality made it even more convincing. Story 85. I was hyped up like nothing else for this film, but it was fucking terrible. It is the worst film I've ever seen in a cinema. I even saw Turbulence in a cinema, which was bad. But that's another story. It is the only film I regret not walking out of. I understand why people love it, but I think it's absolute garbage. Story 86. I thought it was dumb. My girlfriend at the time was terrified. Story 87. I thought it was the dullest movie I had ever seen, and I did not understand the hype at all. The cinema screening I attended was not very full, so there was no atmosphere from the audience. Story 88. I saw it at the drive-in theater. I don't remember much. I was very young, but it was spooky. Story 89. I thought it was real. Filming the entire movie on a camcorder was so unique. Story 90. It was nauseating. I had to focus on the seat back in front of me and watch the movie out of my peripheral vision. The shaky camera work could not die soon enough. Otherwise, it was a good movie. Story 91. I felt a little dizzy, but it was very engaging the entire time. Story 92. I was about 16 at the time, and it was heavily advertised as true events, not inspired by or dramatized. It was presented as lost footage. With that in mind, it was terrifying. I loved it, but it really scared me. When I found out it wasn't real, I felt the same disappointment I felt about the final season of Game of Thrones. Story 93. I sat in the front row. Halfway through the movie, I had a bad headache. Story 94. I never saw much of it. I developed severe motion sickness and waited outside feeling nauseous, laughing out loud. Story 95. It was very scary. I went with my cousins when we were teenagers, and we squirmed and screamed the entire time. Story 96. The whole time I kept thinking, is this real? Kind of looks real. Story 97. I got so motion sick that I had to close my eyes throughout the movie to avoid vomiting popcorn and soda on the people in front of me. To this day, all I remember is how huge that girl's nostrils were and how slimy they looked. Story 98. The rumor that the footage was real made it frightening if you believed it. Story 99. I was a teenager and went with my friend and her mother. I remember some people in the theater being scared, but most of us were confused. When it ended, someone said, "That's it." Story 100. The movie was boring and had little value to me personally. Being in a crowded theater with people who were genuinely scared and vocal was awesome. Story 101. I did not know about the viral marketing online, but I went solo backpacking earlier that summer and became lost for a couple of hours in a valley full of bears, with dead trees falling and no sign of other people. It was exceptionally unnerving. Later, I saw the movie and it got under my skin. I was living in a mountain community, so most locals had their own wilderness stories, and everyone in the theater seemed spooked. Story 102. I fucking hated it. It ended and I was like, that's it? I never understood the hype for this movie. Story 103. I hated the handheld camera technique, which has been copied too often since then. It looked like a bad selfie. Story 104. After all the hype, I felt underwhelmed and motion sick. Story 105. People genuinely believed it was real. The whole theater was filled with a strange, quiet tension because no one knew whether they were watching fiction or an actual found tape. Story 106. People thought it was real. Not everyone did. You could tell it was fiction if you looked closely. The marketing, however, presented it as genuine found footage being distributed to raise awareness of 3 missing student filmmakers. The film itself was fantastic. Adding the extra layer of uncertainty about whether the events really occurred gave it a level of tension I had never experienced in another horror film. Could never be duplicated today. Story 107. I was perfectly fine during the movie. I even laughed at parts and gently poked fun at my then-girlfriend for being so worked up as I drove her home after the midnight show. After that, I had to drive myself home at 2 in the morning through 30 miles of empty, pitch-black Central California nothingness. I apologized the next day. Story 108. I was 16. My cousin and I were convinced it was real based on how it was advertised. We went home and frantically told my dad. The look of pure disappointment on his face snapped me out of it. I remember being terrified for the entire second half of the movie and during the whole ride home. It was a different time. Story 109. I was annoyed that people were upset because they were not actually watching the murder of 3 people on film. The rumors that it was real got out of hand. My sister got sick from the shaky camera, and I felt the tension throughout, never knowing what was going to happen next. I wish we had seen the witch herself, but that might have ruined the movie's narrative. Funny story, not made up. In college, we watched the film with the director present. There was a question and answer session afterward, and I have no idea whether it was a prank or serious, but someone came up to the microphone and asked, "Did you guys ever play Dungeons and Dragons growing up? Because that bag of teeth outside the tent is very similar to how you cast an invisibility spell." There was an awkward beat, and with a crooked swing of his arm, the director said, "No, but I played a lot of Donkey Kong." And that was the end of the story. Story 110, kind of innovative for its time. The whole documentary film was a new concept. It was genuinely scary, since I've camped in the woods before. Those scenes in the tent were frightening. Being alone in the woods and then seeing the tent being touched was terrifying. I would run until dawn or until I found other people. Story 111. I will top that. I am personally friends with the man who scored the soundtrack, and his cousin Ed Sanchez is the creator and director. We attended a private screening at Seneca Creek State Park in Maryland that was sponsored by a major district of Columbia radio station. Select contest winners were in the audience for this private screening. It had not been officially released yet, if I recall. We attended with Ed and the other director in a small entourage, and no one knew the creators were present. It was a cool experience. Story 112. I saw it at a midnight showing on opening night. I stayed in my chair for 15 minutes because I was so freaked out. I'd watched all the clips and reports that were online. I honestly thought it was all real. Story 113. I thought it was a documentary. It was creepy and frightening. Story 114. The whole movie sucked until the last 15 minutes. For the most part, we constantly criticized the trio's choices, but when she went to the basement to see the man standing in the corner, her camera dropped. That scene terrified everyone in the theater. Weeks later, you could not go anywhere in the woods in the tri-state area around Washington County, Pennsylvania without seeing stick figures hanging from trees. Every forest in West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania had them. It was a bizarre trend that continued for years after the film. Story 115. I saw it before we knew. It was still presented as real, a documentary that blew everybody away at Sundance. I watched it at the Neptune in Seattle back when it was a theater. It had ancient, creaky wood floors, worn seats, and walls lined with statues of Neptune looking down at the audience with glowing eyes. The theater felt like a horror movie. Honestly, it felt like you could feel the witch in the room. It was totally unsettling. Later, on the underground tour, I kept facing the corners of rooms so that when my wife turned around she would see me and scream. I wonder why that one did not work out. I found out how the movie was made afterward. Although I was impressed, I was tremendously disappointed. Story 116. It was like watching a very bad movie with a dumb ending. Story 117. This was the first film in the found footage genre that I had seen. Going into the theater, we did not know whether what we were seeing was real. It was genuinely frightening, scarier than almost any film I had seen. Looking back now that we know the truth, it is easy to shrug the film off, but at the time it was truly terrifying. Story 118. It was very scary, mostly because of the marketing. There were missing posters everywhere. Story 119. I have a better setup. My friends and I were able to pirate movies back then, and we downloaded one about a year before it was released in theaters. At the time it was believed to be actual found footage, so we were very scared because we thought it was real. Story 120. The camera work was a major part of the film. That real-life bouncy camera had never been used to that extent in a full-length movie, and it was groundbreaking, though it also made me nauseous. The mystery of whether it was real or staged was a fresh idea. The director, who also produced the film, was a big hit because it was impressive storytelling on a very low budget. Everyone loved smart directors working fast and loose outside the Hollywood studio system. Story 121. I was on a second date with a woman. It was her idea to watch a scary movie. I do not like scary movies, but my friends told me to just suck it up and toughen up. Classic 1990s male machismo. They said that if I kept my composure, it would make me look less like a dork. They were sort of right. She held my hand, squeezed it, and kept ducking into my shoulder for protection. She apologized, and I reassured her that it was all right. I did my best to maintain my composure. The movie was both annoying and anxiety-inducing. Story 122. Fucking terrifying. That type of work had never been made or seen. It was very creative and scary. Every found footage film owes part of its profits to the creators. In addition, there were many commercials, documentaries, and missing person posters for the characters, as if they were real. The media did a great job convincing us it was real. Story 123. It really messed with your mind. You heard things in the film that made you go, what the heck was that? The tense scene with laughter, no thanks. When I got home and got ready for bed, the slight sounds freaked me out. At 14, I slept on my parents' bedroom floor. Story 124. Honestly, I did not find it scary. It was an okay movie. The found footage premise and execution were excellent, especially the internet-based promotion and tie-ins leading up to the release, but the movie itself was kind of mediocre. I did have a few creeped-out moments in the real world afterward, like what user Tarantella described, and that was not normal for me even back then. I would say the movie had an impact on me, but The Matrix had a more profound in-theater experience when comparing 1999 films. Story 125. I saw it with friends when I was 17. We met at the theater and left separately. I drove home alone. My home was deep in the woods. It was pitch black outside. I was terrified, laughing out loud. Story 126. I had been working at a summer camp, so I did not watch any television and had no idea what the movie was about. I had never seen the trailer. I started seeing a man and we went to see it on a second date. If his intention was for me to freak out, grab his hands in fear, and cuddle close to him, he succeeded. I was so frightened. That ending is still terrifying. Story 127. I went with my ex-wife and I walked out saying it was fucking genius. She did not sleep for a month. Story 128. It was terrifying. The entire audience was on the edge of its seats. Some people were screaming, others crying. Some had their hands over their faces, and some were frozen in place. I saw several girls leave. They had oversold the theater, and some of us were sitting on the steps. I had never been in a theater that full, with everyone having the same experience. seemed so real. I stopped watching scary movies after that. I cannot handle another jump scare for the rest of my life. Story 129. I had a similar reaction to Paranormal Activity 1. I was unsure whether it was real or fake. I was 14 in 1999, by the way. Story 130. It was stupid and annoying. I am easily frightened and did not find it scary at all. Story 131. It was interesting because it was unique and different, but I found it more annoying than anything. I knew it was fake, so I did not go into it believing it was real. I do not think I ever rewatched it. I still have my McFarlane Blair Witch action figures, which are much cooler than the movie ever was, in my opinion. Story 132. Oh, it really scared me. I was 19 at the time, and we were driving back from the movie theater and had to park on a very dark, frightening street. My friend and I held each other, our necks whipping around at every sound. I still get spooked if I watch that movie at night. I laugh about it, but it's not even frightening. It's just the psychological aspect, I guess. Story 133. The beauty of the film was not only the film itself. It was its promotion and propaganda in the very early days of the internet, when people were not as jaded as they are now. When you watched it, a small part of you thought, yes, I know it is just a movie, but maybe. Story 134. Side note. I was already an eBay seller, saw the film on opening night, and had an idea. My girlfriend and I went into the woods, gathered a bunch of sticks, tied them up, and sold more than I thought we ever would online. Those were insane times. Story 135. I was 5. The film left us with more questions than answers, and I was laughing very hard. Story 136. I was bored out of my mind. I didn't really know much about the movie and was roped into seeing it by some coworkers when we visited our corporate office. Mind you, I love movies, but the haphazardness of this one just didn't do it for me. Story 137. It was fucking boring. I screened it with other theater employees, and at the end several simultaneously said, "That's it?" Story 138. You could hear a pin drop at times. It was brilliant. I have not seen a horror with an atmosphere like that since. Story 139. It was so good. After the movie, I was dropped off at the top of our driveway. Our house was about 150 feet down a walkway with trees flanking the path, and it was pitch black. I ran as fast as I could to the front door. It was terrifying. Story 140. It can be nauseating for some viewers due to motion sickness caused by the shaky, fast-moving camera work. Story 141. I remember a bunch of very annoying people, and I even hoped I would see them all die, but it took far too long. Ultimately, I found the film rubbish. It was the first time I ever considered walking out of the cinema. I did not, but I kept thinking about it, and I never want to waste my time on it again. I enjoyed the last broadcast. It was a much better film. Story 142. I was 13. A friend and I went to see it after hearing it called the scariest movie ever made. We both came out of it disappointed. I remember a man in front of us asking if that was it after the film finished. In the years since, it has become one of my favorite horror films. I think I was simply too young at the time to appreciate it for what it was. Story 143. I thought it was corny as hell and laughed at most of the jump scares and at the people in the audience who were scared by them. The movie was a massive disappointment for me. Story 144. It was the kind of creep that stays with you. I remember leaving and not wanting to go camping again. In fact, I have not. It is definitely something to experience. Story 145. My wife and I left our children with a babysitter so we could watch a movie. Afterward, I walked her home in the dark. I was so frightened by that film that I asked her husband to walk me back. Story 146. We came out of the theater, turned the corner, and passed a house with the front window open. The lights were off, and someone inside jumped up screaming. I have been on heart medication ever since. Story 147. I was a college student working on campus that summer. My girlfriend would not watch it, so I went to see it alone late one night. This was a small college town, so there were very few people in the theater and the streets were deserted when I walked back to my dorm. As I was walking, the streetlight directly above me turned off. Then, one by one, The streetlights in front of me shut off, only on my side of the street. I froze for a moment, wondering whether I should keep walking. The lights behind me remained on. Only the light above me and those along the path ahead were off. I turned left and walked quickly the long way back to my dorm. Story 148. I watched it at an outdoor, tree-lined cinema. It was the best way to watch a film with perfect ambience. Story 149. I was 16 when I saw it in theaters. I knew only that it was a scary documentary, and at the time it was one of the most frightening films I had ever seen. Afterward, someone explained it was not a true documentary but a work of fiction, and I felt foolish for letting it scare me so much. To be young and naive. Story 150. That summer I was a camp counselor at Camp Wazatata, deep in the Maine woods. It was literally an hour's drive to get out of the woods. We had been working all summer and had heard nothing about the movie. Finally, we had a night off, so we drove an hour out to town. After watching the movie, which we believed was found footage, we drove an hour back through the woods to camp. We were as legitimately freaked out as young adults can be. I don't think any of us slept that night. Story 151. It was a long time ago, and there was nothing like it then, at least that I knew of, except perhaps the original Turner Classic Movies. Story 152. I didn't know anything about it. I was just meeting a friend to go see a movie. Right before it started, my friend told me it was a true story. That was the rumor when it was first released. I went into the movie thinking it was really happening. I have never been so scared by a movie in my life. It was actually kind of exciting in hindsight. I don't think a movie will ever scare me like that again. Story 153. I remember everyone laughed when her nose was dripping on the camera. I was weirded out by the ending. It did not stay with me, though. I never really think about the movie the way I do 28 Days Later. I saw A Nightmare on Elm Street in theaters and it scared me. None of these even came close to Predator. That was mind-blowing. Story 154. I get no pleasure from horror movies, but the hype around TBWP was so big that I went to a daytime showing. I still have nightmares and regret my choice to this day. Story 155. This is and will always be the scariest movie I have ever seen. I was up for hours after leaving the theater, searching for a palate cleanser of some sort. I won't venture into any type of wooded area, day or night, solely because of this film. I can't hear the name Josh without thinking of the character out in the woods, wailing. The behind-the-scenes facts are even creepier. Story 156. It was terrifying. The marketing was brilliant and made us believe it was real. It did not help that it was shot near where I lived. I was 18 and slept in the living room of my parents' house that night. My room was in the basement and that was not happening. Story 157. It was terrifying. I was so scared I almost cried. I was 13 and did not know the premise going in, as no one did, and found footage or selfies were not a thing. I almost thought it was a documentary. Then I had to drive through a forest to get home with my 16-year-old cousin. The shaky camera also made me feel sick. Story 158. Growing up in the country and spending a lot of time in the woods, I thought they were foolish for leaving the river when they were lost. Everyone knows if you are lost you follow a river downstream. Eventually it will lead to people. That said, I liked the concept, the filming, and the direction. The last minute of the movie was cool. Story 159. I had to step outside to be sick. All that constant camera shaking made me throw up. I missed about half an hour, and I couldn't watch it properly when I returned, so it was rather poor for me. It was much better when I watched it a few years later on television. Story 160. I remember that all the promotion around the movie made it ambiguous whether it was a film or based on real events. As a young teenager, I was not sure if it was real, which made it very terrifying. Story 161. Nauseating, mostly. The shaky camera and running triggered some motion sickness. It was tense in a few places, but I did not think it lived up to the hype at the time. Story 162. Terrifying. Every time the screen went black, the theater went pitch black. I saw no one. Knowing other people were there with me, yet not knowing or seeing them, made the experience much better. Story 163. Nauseating. The audience was not used to that kind of camera movement, and there were probably 20 people in my theater who ran out, hands over their mouths. The lead up to the film with all of the marketing was fascinating. The number of people who swore up and down that they had previously heard of the Blair Witch legend was astonishing. It did not matter how many times you told them it was a marketing ploy. They really wanted to believe. Story 164. I went with a mixed group, and a couple of the women became nauseous and left. One began vomiting. Story 165. I worked at a movie theater at the time, and as a projectionist we actually had to build the print. After you build the print, you have to screen it. You are not supposed to be watching the movie. You are supposed to be double-checking your work. You check that the splices are correct, that you did not put the reels in the wrong order, and you look for damage to the prints. My girlfriend at the time came by and we watched the movie alone at about 2 a.m. I fell for the marketing and we both thought it was supposed to be real. I was pretty cool with it because I was into horror, Evil Dead and all that. However, when you get to the end and they actually go into the witch's house, I really started to get uneasy. Then the ending, when she goes into the basement and sees her friend standing in the corner facing the wall, was shocking. We were both really shaken after that. We were relieved to find out it was all fake. They did a very good job hyping the movie and making it look real. Luckily, there were no issues with the print. I'm not sure you could have fixed problems and kept watching it over and over. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.